Kenneth Walker is a very hot button topic on Twitter, just because the film community heavily disagrees with guys like me who are thinking in the way that I'm about to explain right now. He probably is a good rusher. We have an idea of that. There's metrics out there that say he's a good rusher. He's probably going to get drafted highly because he's a good rusher. He had a big final season in rushing market share because he was our workhorse, because he's a good rusher. He's efficient. But the thing that I get caught up with on Kenneth Walker, and I don't think it's a bad thing to get caught up on, is the fact that he had very little receiving work through his entire college career, 3 years in multiple different systems with Wake Forest and then Michigan State. He never topped like 5 market share receiving yards. He never topped like 4 or 3%. Like that was his ceiling at 3% ish in 2021. And so when you don't profile at all like a receiver, it hurts your ceiling and your floor for your range of outcomes, where you have a lower floor and you have a lower ceiling, because receiving scores as fantasy football points, right? It's the reason that we chase receiving at the running back position. And when you have a lower ceiling like that and a lower floor, it's not something I'm investing in with a top 4 first round pick. I don't know where the ADP is going to land after draft capital and all gets sorted out, but he's probably going to be going top 6 at worst, because he's a running back and people really like young running backs. But I'm just not interested. As they should. But I'm not interested in investing in a young running back who doesn't have a very high projectable ceiling like Kenneth Walker. And he has a lower floor because of that, less receiving. It's just how it is. I don't think he's a bad player. He can be good at the game and also have a range of outcomes that's less than desirable for his opportunity cost. I would much rather invest in one of the receivers there, Drake London, Treylon Burks, Garrett Wilson, Jameson Williams. They're all guys I would rather take. Right now, as I'm doing this, I'm pretty sure I would rather take them all over Kenneth Walker. Not because I think that Walker's bad again, but just because of the range of outcomes.
Yeah, and the point that you were talking about, how you would have to spend a high rookie pick or any of those backs to get Kenneth Walker. Well, part of that production is top 12. Like, you want RB1. You want RB1 production, because RB2 production really doesn't do all that much in terms of the overall lens of fantasy football championships and point scoring. But when we look at top 12 at your position, so if you finished as an RB1 since the 2006 class, there's been 63 running backs that have done it since the 2006 class. And I keep, when I'm looking at prospects, I keep receiving yard market share scores. So like basically how many receiving yards you get over the scores, essentially how many you get over the average prospect that has a top 12 season, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's what the score is. So Kenneth Walker's score out of all those 63 running backs that have had an RB1 season would rank above only one player, Chris Ivory, who was ranked 63rd. And then when we talk about like prospect score or like prospect grades, elite prospects, no one comes close to the score Kenneth Walker had. The closest one would be Melvin Gordon, who didn't actually have like a great profile or anything like that, and his still more than doubled what score Kenneth Walker had, because Kenneth Walker simply just doesn't catch passes, and that's something that you kind of need at least to do a little bit of.
And he doesn't project like that at all.
Yeah, so
not even a little bit.
For Kenneth Walker to realistically hit that RB1, we have to be looking at like premium landing spot, somewhere where his usage would be through the roof, because to be someone who doesn't catch passes, your usage, like Derrick Henry, would have to be insane. You'd have to be on an offense that scores a lot, and you would have to be doing a lot of that scoring. So
while we can project him, while we can say that he's probably a good rusher as a prospect coming out of college, we can't project him to be a Derrick Henry in the NFL. It's just not something that I would say I expect. Certainly anything is possible, but it's nothing I would expect right now. And when you look at players like Ian was saying, like players often here brought up as counterexamples is that in college, guys like Melvin Gordon, Leonard Fournette, Jonathan Taylor, AJ Dillon, those guys didn't catch passes either, but they caught passes in the NFL, so it's not something we should use. But they all had better market share receiving yards in college than Kenneth Walker. It's not something where you have to be dominant in market share of receiving yards at every year for me to consider you like at least a passable receiver. It's just something that you have to show you can do it at least a little bit, and show that you and in at least one season of doing it.
Yeah, like, and there's levels to it. So like when you bring up like Jonathan Taylor, for example, or like there's a type when it comes to Jonathan Taylor, like Adrian Peterson, like that type where you are a really good rusher, and Jonathan Taylor is a really good rusher. Something like people say about Kenneth Walker, he could be this really good rusher like them, which is true. But they've also been capable of being that 3-down back that in college was adequate at catching passes. What that means is like a 10% target share your second year in the NFL. Like when you're blowing up like Jonathan Taylor last year, 10% target share. Is that great? No. But also if he's not adequate enough at catching passes, he doesn't finish as highly. And if we are talking about Jonathan Taylor, who I want to say, if we're looking at RB1s the past years, I know it was Christian McCaffrey 2020, Saquon 2019. Like,
yeah,
I can't remember who was before that, but we're talking about high target share players because
early in 2018, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And that's more of like a Jonathan Taylor target type or receiving type.
He was a better receiver, I think.
Yeah, he was a better receiver than Jonathan Taylor.
I think Jonathan Taylor had the least receptions since like Adrian Peterson in 2012.
Yeah, and the part I was going to say was Jonathan Taylor, scored as an RB1 with adequate receiving, but he also had
other running backs got hurt or played on a bad offense, like Kamara.
Yeah,
CMC,
he had
Henry.
One of the lowest, or for a while, he's had the lowest points per game for an RB1. I can't remember in how long, which was kind of the point that I was trying to get to. Was Jonathan Taylor finishes the RB1, but if this is any other year, you could be looking at like RB5, RB6, because there's guys like Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, Alvin Kamara that are capable of catching a ton of passes, and when most leagues like ours are points per reception, like that goes a long way. Like Christian McCaffrey catches a pass and runs 10 yards, that doubles being a really good rusher and running it 10 yards, which is kind of just what we're trying to say about Kenneth Walker. Kenneth Walker's rushing production would have to be like triple what I'm lost on this one on who to compare him to. But yeah, you kind of need receiving production to be a top end running back. Like, would it surprise us if Kenneth Walker's an RB2 his rookie year and he had solid missed tackles? No, not at all. It would not surprise me. Would it surprise me if he had a 10% target share, which is what I call about adequate? You're not some great receiving catcher or receiving pass catcher. That would surprise me a lot because he doesn't. Like Kosh said, I think his season high receiving yard market share was like 3%. That's nothing.
It's really bad. And to compare that, the thing I often hear with him, like with the counter examples that I said earlier, that they also didn't catch a lot of passes, but a lot of them played in low volume offenses. But when you use receiving yards market share, then you can adequately compare players across different offenses. Offenses like Wisconsin and with Gordon and Taylor, or Boston College with Dillon, or LSU's with Fournette. I think they all ran pretty low volume offenses because they had those great running backs, or good running backs for Dillon. I don't think he's very great. Anyways, but they had a lot higher receiving yards market share because when you compare them without looking at the total volume, you can get a better sense of the receivers that they are. And Kenneth Walker just doesn't even touch those guys who were considered to be okay receivers, but not great.
Yeah, and I mean, they needed that too. Like, that's just all we're trying